I'm Dr. Odette Suter. I'm a holistic veterinarian in the Chicago area, and I am very passionate about helping animals, of course, and also about educating people. But I also have a book that I wrote, What Your Vet Never Told You. With the fireworks coming up, I know there's a lot of anxiety going on. I hear from people, a lot of them are, can you give me something for my dog? It's awful and provides a lot of stress to a lot of people. But I don't want to just talk about dogs. I want to include the other animals as well, including cats and horses a little bit in that. So I just want to start out with a little bit of numbers, because that's always important. I want you to know you guys are not alone. There are a lot of dogs that have issues with fireworks and noise sensitivity in general. About 1/3 of the animals in the United States tend to have noise aversion, and that number may be higher even, because it seems like everybody's talking about it. A lot of animals, once they have experienced a fearful event like fireworks, for example, they will require several days or even longer to recover behaviorally from that. And one patient that comes to mind, he happened to be outside doing his business, and there was fireworks going on right next door, and that was even during the day, because right now we're not even safe anymore because fireworks are happening all the time. So it's not really a 4th of July thing anymore, and it's not something that is only done in the evening when it's dark, which is how we did that as kids. We waited until it's dark. But no, they do it during the day, at any given time. So it's really difficult to kind of predict and be prepared. But in any case, this dog was outside with one of his guardians, and the firework went off and he got freaked out, and so for several days he didn't want to go outside to do his business, especially at that particular time. And he also associated it with the owner, so he also didn't want to go out with the owner at that time. So they kind of take a picture of all the things that happened during that fearful event, and then they associate it, so that can make things more difficult. And that's then also what takes them longer to kind of recover from it, because they associate it with a lot of different things. So it's not just the trigger of the noise, it can also then be the trigger of the time of day, the trigger of who they were out with and what they were doing, and the location they were in when it happened. Because the same dog, the owner is in the process of moving, and they've been starting to help him get used to the new environment. And so they've been going over to the new house in the evenings, and he's fine over there. So he doesn't have that same association. So it can be very challenging and a little bit more complex. Same with storms. A lot of animals, they will already feel it when it's coming, even if the sky is all blue and there's really no storm in sight. They already start to feel the change of the barometric pressure and the static in the air. So there are a lot of things that kind of play a role. So it's not just the individual phobia, but it has associations. And there are more than 3% of dogs that will actually exhibit behavioral changes for weeks and even months. So it's quite awful, really. In my opinion, fireworks should never have been invented. I think they're useless. They create a lot of fear, and they're also polluting the environment on top of everything. As fun as they were when I was a kid, I see more challenges from it than benefits. One thing they also have as a number is that 1 in 5 dogs will go missing during fireworks. So make sure it's not one of yours, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Obviously, you guys know your dogs really well, and you know how they show their fears, but I just want to talk briefly about the different signs that they can exhibit. One is obviously pacing and being restless, trembling, cowering, hiding, and freezing, being immobile, seeking your attention, refusing to eat, and vocalizing can be part of that too. But then there are some that are a little bit less obvious, such as lip licking, so if a dog continues to lip lick and yawn and that sort of thing, that can also be a sign of fear, or having the ears back and a little bit of a frown, that can be part of fear as well. And there are obviously different degrees of that, and again, you have to kind of evaluate it for your own animal, how it is, because that will tell you what you may need to do, because some dogs are so fearful that, all the natural things are not going to help. And on that note, I want to share with you a little bit of the study findings that were done based on an online questionnaire survey that was done of over 1,200 respondents. They just wanted to know what was working for these animals and what people had most success with. What they found was that environmental modification, which is basically creating hiding places and windows and blinds closed and playing music, was not quite as successful as some of the other ways to do it. What they found was the most successful was actually doing counter conditioning, which is basically playing some music of fireworks or storms or whatever your animals are afraid of, while feeding them a good treat. So basically desensitization and counter conditioning. So that was one of the most successful ways of getting animals to relax and have less firework fears and phobias. So the success rate was about 70%. And then relaxation training was also very helpful. Had about the same percentage, 69%. And relaxation training, the way that works is you start with massaging your dogs in long strokes, or petting your dog or your animal, and then you associate it with a word that then kind of helps them remember, okay, if I say relax, then that's what that means, and they start associating it with that feeling that they had when you were petting them or massaging them. And then once they're actually conditioned, you can use it in stressful situations even without the massage. So you just say the word relax or whatever works for you, and then they will kind of start to relax. And the way that works is really you're training the nervous system to get into a pattern of relaxation as a result. So it kind of helps to strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the healing and relaxing and digesting part of the autonomic nervous system, which is the opposite of the fight or flight. So you're basically kind of helping to train that nervous system to be stronger and helping them to access it more easily with this relaxation training. So those two, from more of a behavior modification standpoint, were the most effective. And then the next effective one was medication at 69% improvement. And there are a lot of drugs that can be used, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about those in a minute. And then they also checked for feed and play. That was also quite effective. Distracting them while it's happening, that seemed to help more than the coddling coddling helped too, but the ignoring part, that didn't really work all that well. So it's better to actually interact, feed, play, distract, these types of things. They seem to work better than ignoring. Pressure vests that put pressure on the body help as well. Other alternative modalities such as nutraceuticals that are calming, like L-theanine, melatonin, these types of things, pheromones, other types of herbs, homeopathics, Bach flower essences, essential oils. For those, they found that there was only about a 27 to 35% improvement, and it's really not much higher than what's expected for a placebo effect. So again, in the survey, it didn't sound like it was helping that much, making that much of a difference. But again, it very much depends on how stressed your animals are, how severe it is, because the less severe it is, the more likely some of these more gentle approaches will help. Whereas if your dog is in like a full-blown panic, you can do all the lavender essential oils you want, or, give Bach flower essences. It's not going to work. So it really depends on where your animal is. And the thing is, too, when the animal is in a, full-blown panic mode, they are not able to learn. So all the behavior modifications and counter-conditioning things are not going to really help, because they're in such panic that they can't learn. And I'm sure you've all experienced that, right? When you were in a situation where you were so freaked out that you couldn't even talk, or that your brain went completely blank and you couldn't really learn anything. So for these animals, it's really important that we bring their anxiety and stress level down to a level where they can still learn something, where they have the ability to do that. And sometimes that will require some drugs. And again, as a holistic vet, I'm not a huge fan of drugs, but I'm also not a huge fan of having dogs walk around with major anxiety, because that is not healthy either. And when they get put into such high anxiety level and panic level, it also trains the body or the nervous system to respond in more ways of panic in possibly other situations. So it can kind of get transferred, because any experience that we have trains the nervous system to respond in a certain way. So if we train them to be relaxed, it will train them to become more relaxed over time and have better access to that. But if they're getting trained to have anxiety, that will also increase that neurologic pathway of being more stressed and more anxious. So we have to get the anxiety level down so that we can even make a difference. And then eventually they can get off of it, But sometimes it's the kinder thing to do, to help them out. One perfect example is my neighbor's dog. He has a lot of anxiety, separation anxiety, and they finally put him on some medication. And now he still has some of that anxiety, but he's not nearly as stressed, and he's in a place where he can learn more. So when he comes to visit me, when they're out, especially when fireworks are going off, he will still take food. Whereas before, he was so stressed out that he wouldn't even take any food. So he's definitely, it's kind of at a more tolerable level. So anyway, so that's for the alternatives can help really great. And again, you have to try it out, see what works for your animals. There's no one size fits all. But overall, it seems like medication, counter-conditioning, and relaxation trainings were the top 3 things that worked the best. So let's talk a little bit about the different, since we were talking about drugs, let's just talk a little bit about those first, and then we'll kind of work our way to more natural things, and also what we need to think about, in and around those events that are really important. So for drugs, and that's something obviously that you would have to talk to your regular veterinarian. And again, because fireworks are happening, daily already, it's a little bit more challenging, but I would definitely suggest, if you have a very stressed out dog, to, communicate with your veterinarians and see what the best options are. Because there are some anti-anxiety drugs that you have to give for a while until they really kick in, which are the SSRIs, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. But then we also have drugs that work pretty much more for situations, that we can use for situations, such as alprazolam, which is close to Valium. It's in the same family of drugs. There's trazodone, there's Benadryl that can also help. Some of those we can use more just whenever needed. But the important thing with these drugs, especially the ones that we use more situational, they definitely have to be given before the event starts, because if you already have a stressed out dog, it may not work nearly as well, or may not work at all. So there's also a drug called Celio. It's a gel that you can put in the mouth, and that one starts to work in 30 to 60 minutes and lasts about 2 to 3 hours. Trazodone, you have to give it about an hour and a half to an hour, an hour to an hour and a half before it starts as well. All right, so that's as far as drugs are concerned. Now I want to get to a little bit of the different alternative modalities that you can use. For example, there are diffusers that you can use that have pheromones in them, such as Adaptil, for example. And these pheromones, they're produced by the mom when she's right after she's giving birth to the puppies and is lactating, basically. And what it does is it gives the puppies a sense of well-being and calming. And so they've now been using this adactyl, this pheromone, to also help adult dogs, to help them relax a little bit more and have some calming effects. You can also use melatonin. Again, with a lot of these things, you have to sort of try it ahead of time to see what the effect is when your animal is not stressed out, because if there's no effect from the melatonin dose that you're giving, it's most likely not going to work either when the fireworks are hitting. So you want to make sure that you can kind of try it out beforehand. L-theanine is another one that also helps to kind of decrease anxiety. There are a lot of flower essences out there, including Bach flowers, that you can use. But again, try it out, see how it works. If your dog is anxious in general, you can try out these flower essences for other events that are, creating some anxiety and see if it helps. You can also use essential oils. My neighbor's dog, for example, he does quite well sometimes with a little bit of lavender. So I dab a little bit of lavender on his forehead. He doesn't particularly like it, but it seems to do a little, calm him down a little bit more. He tends to be a little more relaxed as a result. Chamomile, for example. So there are a lot of different essential oils that can be used. Calmile from Animal EO. There's a lot of them. Xylkine is one of them as well. That's a milk-based one that also has some anti-anxiety properties. Again, you have to try it to see if it works. There are different homeopathic remedies that can help as well for firestorms. Homeopet TFLN is one of them, and you would give the drops ahead of time as well, probably about 3 to 4 times a day. You can also use valerian, for example. So there are a lot of herbal tinctures that have calming effects, but some of them you have to start giving ahead of time because it takes a little bit of time to build up in the system. RX Vitamins has a supplement that I use quite frequently. It's called NutriCalm, and that one has a combination of different nutrients that I just mentioned, such as valerian. It has some ashwagandha in it, which decreases stress levels, helps the adrenal glands. It has tryptophan, which is a precursor for melatonin. It has catnip in it that also gives them a little bit of a sense of high, especially for your cats. And I have a funny story. I have a little bag of catnip at my practice, and there are 4 cats who live in the practice. In the store, because my practice is within a pet store. And so when I leave the door open, there's always one cat that comes in and steals the bag, and I find the bag somewhere in the pet store later. I'm like, oh, how'd that get there? I caught the cat in the act one time, and so I sprinkle a little bit of catnip for them. So that can be a very good thing for your cats too, just to sprinkle a little bit of catnip. L-theanine is also part of that NutriCalm as well. So there are a lot of things in that, and can be used for anxiety in general. It can be used as a long-term product. It doesn't cause side effects, basically. And then, CBD oil can also have a calming effect on pets. Again, you would want to try that and see which dose would be required, and that may be a bit of trial and error. The thing is that, some dogs need just a little bit of CBD oil and it knocks them out, and other dogs need a whole lot. And so, I usually start on a low dose and then work my way up just to kind of see where it's at. And obviously, on a day where they're not stressed out, you may need much less to kind of knock them out than if on a day where there's more stress. But just the same as with valerian, CBD will also build up in the system a little bit. So it's better to start giving it ahead of time as well, so that you can, have a little bit of a build up of that. And then certainly give it at least twice a day because you want to have a good effect, and maybe give it an hour to 2 hours before the event so that it has a little bit of time to kick in. And you can also redose as it goes, because some of these firework shows, they can go on for hours. So those are some of the nutraceuticals, more of the holistic things that you can do. I mentioned the thunder shirt. We don't really know how that exactly works, but the thought is that it helps to release oxytocin, and oxytocin makes them feel more calm and helps that way. Other things that can be done as well is to give them treats and food and chews and things like that, because that's very distracting for them. So while the fireworks are going on, if you do some of that, you're actually also training them to do better. And they have found that doing that actually will increase the likelihood that they will be less stressed the next time around. And of course it has to be a high value thing. I mean, you know your animals, you know what they like best. Some dogs that are not very much into treats, they may be more into play. So you want to, do some of that. So those are some of the things that you can help with as well. What can you do, or what do you have to do around firework events and storm events as well to prepare? So again, because a lot of animals can get lost during that time, I highly recommend that you take a current photo of your animals so that you have the most accurate one and not one from when they were a puppy. If you have a 12-year-old dog that gets lost and you give a puppy picture, it's not very likely that they'll find it. You can also make a den, although it's not as successful as some of the other things that I mentioned. You want to definitely secure your house. You want to make sure that, the doors to the outside are locked. If you have a party yourself and have friends over, make sure that your animals are safely stowed away in a room where they can't get out, where your people can't get in, your visitors. If you have to lock the door, do that. Obviously, when the fireworks then start happening, you don't want to just leave them there all by themselves if they have anxiety. Obviously that doesn't work. You want to also find out what your neighbors' plans are. Go house door to door and ask them, when are you going to do fireworks? What time? How long? What days? What kinds? Are they going to be loud? Or are they just going to be like a light show? Because what that will do is it will also help bring awareness to your neighbors that you have a dog that has anxiety, and that you're relying on them, and that you're probably not the only one with an animal that has anxiety. So it kind of opens up the communication and the discussion, and maybe it can kind of create a bit more community in your neighborhood where you're all working to help the animals with their fears and that sort of thing. But of course you're always going to have neighbors who say, well, I don't really care. I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do whenever, and I'm just going to do it as I please, and they're not going to inform you, but it's still worth putting it out there so that people are aware that, it's an issue, because I think a lot of people don't even think about that, especially if they don't have animals. And then also be sure that your animals are wearing some form of identification on them, or a microchip, whatever you choose. But make sure they wear at least one collar that has your name and information and phone number on it. And if you have to have a second thing on them, like a harness, for example, that with that information on it again, that'd be great, because, sometimes things can come off as they get lost. It might also be worth keeping a long leash attached in case they get out, because that leash could get tangled up somewhere and then they can't go anywhere, which then makes it easier to catch them, because a lot of dogs that get loose, they're hard to catch because they're already freaked out. Although obviously a long leash attached to them can also cause other issues, but we don't want them to hang themselves, I guess. But things like that, even in your home, if you feel like they're freaked out, tie them to you, have a belt, and just drag them around with you so that they're with you at all time. Especially if you have a party and people are going in and out of the house, make sure your yard is secured as well. And if you have a dog or a cat or a horse that has some special needs. I mean, horses tend to get loose a little bit less, although, it certainly is possible if they live in a situation where they can go in and out and just live in a pasture. So you definitely want to put some identification on your horse as well. You can spray it on them, for example. You can also keep a halter on, although sometimes that can be an issue too, because they can get caught, so that can be a problem. Or if you can also put something in their mane, you can kind of braid some ribbons in it with your information in their tail as well, just so that they have some form of identification on them. And of course, if they were to get loose, contact animal control and the police, especially in the case of horses. You definitely want to do that. With your cats, I think ahead of time it would be great if you can get them used to wearing a collar. Even if they're cats that are in the house, I think it would be a good idea so that you can put it on. And then, what I was going to say is if you have an animal that has a medical condition, also make sure to write it on the collar or harness or whichever, part of an identification that you're using. For example, if your dog needs blood pressure medication or has diabetes or, whatever it may be. Addison's, for example, they are needing cortisol on a regular basis in order to make it. So all of these things, write it down. Write down little things that you think are important, for people to know about your dog or your cat or your horse when they find them. So those are some of the things that you can do ahead of time, planning-wise. And then during the fireworks, not right during the fireworks, but right before, I would give them plenty of exercise so that they're more tired. A more tired animal will be a little bit less anxious as well. Make sure you do it before dark and before fireworks starts. Again, that can be a bit difficult because people are doing it, any time of day these days. Certainly to block out the light show, you can close your shades and drapes. You can also put some music on, some soothing music to keep them calm and to also override some of the sounds of the fireworks out there. If you have a finished basement, you can also go down there with your animals and hang out and just have some fun. Diffusing calming essential oils are certainly helpful, even if they're not taking care of the whole anxiety situation. I would still certainly add it, because I think in the end we just have to do a bit of a combination of things. I think that probably would work the best. And then if you do need to take your pets outside for potty time, make sure they're on the leash and that they're in a secured yard. So even in the yard, don't let them go loose. Just make sure you have a leash on them. If they have difficulty peeing or pooping when they're on the leash, just get a really long leash, so that it kind of feels like they're far away from you enough that you're not spying on their business, basically. But you definitely want to keep them on the leash because scared pets, they can bolt and they can lose sense of direction. So you definitely want to make sure you have them tightly secured. All right, I'm just checking my cheat sheet here to see what else I wanted to mention. But I think that's pretty much kind of it. Oh, one more thing. After, you definitely want to make sure that you check out your yard to make sure there are no firework leftovers that made it into your yard, because you definitely don't want to have your animals ingest those. So make sure you check out your yard before you let your animals out in the morning. All right. So let me see. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Sometimes as they get older, they have more difficult time with it. Young, that's true, because again, as I mentioned, the more events they had where there's anxiety, the more the nervous system is trained to respond. So it's like a little bit like PTSD in a way. So yes, that certainly is a possibility as they get older. One good thing about getting older and them having a little bit of hearing loss going on is that they actually tend to do better with fireworks because they just don't hear them anymore. Obviously, we always want our animals to be able to hear, but I guess if there's one positive of the dog not hearing well anymore, that would be, the noise phobias. There was something else I was thinking about. Oh, yes. One other thing in the drug department, ACE, which is ace-promazine, is not a very good anti-anxiety medication. All it does is it sedates them to the point where they just can't move very well, but the anxiety level is still there. So it's basically like, you're being attacked by somebody, but your body won't move. So that's much more scary because then it puts you completely out of control. So ace-promazine is not a good anti-anxiety medication. It doesn't take away the anxiety. It just basically sort of paralyzes them a little bit. It was so nice hanging out with you guys. I hope it helped. I hope you can keep your animals as safe as possible and make a difference. Again, the best time to really work on phobias is between firework events. And same for storms. For example, we have a lot of more storms going on in the summer here in Illinois, so the best time to work on these things is in the winter time when there are no storms. Same with fireworks. There's a lot less fireworks, obviously, in the winter time because people don't go outside as much here. So that's when you really need to start working on it, and not just a couple days before. And if you do need help from your veterinarian, make sure that you actually call them now or tomorrow to get it going, because 2 days before they're going to be completely overworked with requests. So make sure you give them a little bit of time to get things in order and be able to help you as much as possible. And then, oh yeah, one thing that I forgot to mention, which is absolutely crucial: do not take your animals to a firework show, because that really is not a good idea. But really goes without saying, but I had to say it anyway. All right. Well, it was so good to see you guys. Have a wonderful 4th of July period. Hopefully everything will go well with your animals and there won't be too much stress. Yeah, I'm going to be praying for all of the animals, of course, especially also for the wild animals, because they too are very much affected by this awful noise and can get into a lot of trouble with that. So maybe also drive more slowly if you're out on the road during those days, so that if they come out in a panic, that you're not running them over. On that note, I love you guys all.